been focusing on the book of the Universal Garden of Emunah by Rabbi Shalom Arush, which is a book that aims to deepen our understanding of what it means to have faith in God. Emunah, that word, is the ancient Hebrew biblical word for deep, unshakable faith in God. And once again, I want to give my standard caveat that if you're an atheist, you don't believe in God, I'm not judging you in any way, but this is probably not a video series that you're going to enjoy. I would simply ask that you please not use this space to leave comments or suggestions or arguments aimed at attempting to convince people that there is no God. There are many other platforms for that, and I would ask that you go to those places for that discussion. This is not one of those places. Also a reminder, this is not an attempt by any means to capture all of what Rabbi Arush says in this book. This book, The Universal Garden of Emunah, is really an extremely rich book, an experience, if you read it, with very deep spiritual insights, in my opinion, on every page. Another caveat is I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a priest, I'm not an imam, I'm not a pastor. I'm certainly not qualified in the least, or could even come close to conveying all of the ideas that Rabbi Arush has in there. The series is merely designed to present what I see, and to use some of my attorney skills, maybe in communicating, as some of the highlights of the book, and a book that has helped me personally with many issues in my life. This is given with the hope that you will get this wonderful book, read it, and gain as much as I have from Rabbi Arush's words and insights. And again, it's not meant for any one denomination, it's meant for everybody. That's why it's called the Universal Garden of Emunah. And that brings us to our final piece of housekeeping, which is that, again, if you live in Virginia or North Carolina and you would like a copy of the book, we're happy to send you one completely free. All you got to do is to call us at the number on the screen or email us at the address on the screen. We'd be happy to send you a free copy of the book. Hello there. Once again, here we are. But this time, you notice the background is a little different behind me. And that's because we're actually in the Holy Land of Israel this time. What you see behind me here is what's called Machtesh Ramon. This is a very large crater, about 25 miles long. I don't know if you can see it on this video here. It is humongous, it is beautiful, and it is one of, I believe it's the biggest crater of its kind in the world. It was not formed from a meteor or meteorite. It was formed through geological processes where the surrounding area collapsed and everything kind of went down, and you have this beautiful crater. Again, it's 25 miles long, and I believe in some places it's as deep as 2,400 feet. So it is really quite a sight. It's kind of like the Grand Canyon of Israel. Last time, episode 7, we finished up chapter 5 of the book. Now, welcome to episode 8. We spoke about the virtues of Emunah and how really the many tests and difficulties of life can all be catalysts for us to seek God. And how people with true Emunah are able to not only weather life's difficulties, but really spiritually grow from the experiences that they have. So really, the entire purpose of your existence, and it gets down to that basic fact, is spiritual growth. That is the purpose of your existence. You can't do it after you're gone, after you're dead. You can't spiritually grow anymore. So working on your growth in Emunah, as Rabbi Arush says, is really the best investment that you can make as far as your time and energy are concerned while you're here on this earth. So in chapter 6, which we're going to start now, Rabbi Arush talks about Emunah and emotions specifically. And he starts out by saying on page 205, that Emunah is actually the foundation of emotional health. He goes through a number of emotions, and of course he starts with probably the number one thing that strikes all people, which is just general sadness and malaise. He comes right out of the gate. He says it's a difficult thing for many folks to hear, but he says sadness directly results from a lack of Emunah. He says the notion of Emunah is essentially that God gives you everything that you need, precisely what you need and require. And that any difficulties that come our way, they're there for our benefit, really. And even though it may be hard to see at the time, that's what it's there for. So without Emunah, and for many folks in today's world, life becomes just like a never-ending series of disappointments when things don't go your way. So now we're going to cover a little different concept, which I think is really profound. Some folks say, I'd love to be happy, but I have these horrific, these terrible negative drives. I do, flaws. I have cravings, all kind of things that I do. I know deep down I'm not supposed to be doing these things, and they're not in line. They're not in line with what God wants for me. For instance, having a problem, lusting after other people's spouses, or looking at pornography, something like this, And people might say, if only I was not born with these negative urges and drives, I could be a person that's happy, but I got all these drives. And Rabbi Arush says, look, these drives, these things are there, and they should be a source of joy, not sadness. Why? Because all these apparent deficiencies, they're not deficiencies at all. Rather, they're catalysts for personal growth. A person that doesn't have these kinds of cravings, isn't born with these kind of things or challenges or things that set them off, off the path, you would say, they don't have the opportunity to overcome them and develop spiritually. So he then gives example after example from our Bible, other writings which the religious Jewish people call Tanakh. Basically, the whole breadth of the Bible, including all the writings and all the prophets, etc. All these people that you think were born with deficiencies or flaws, they actually turned out to be advantages because they overcame them and used them to their advantage. The point is that someone who the power of prayer and Emunah has overcome that many might think are disadvantages, has a strength and closeness to God that is way greater than a person who never had any such challenges before. As he said in other parts of the book, a person who had an easy life, not faced any challenges, always wins. Often becomes arrogant, rarely sees that God is there to assist them. Arrogance is like putting up, a steel barrier between you and God. When these folks finally do face a challenge, these kinds of people that he's talking about, have never been challenged in life, they often fall apart. Someone who's facing these trying situations and cravings without, Emunah and prayers, we all know, can really fall into depression, sadness, despair, some cases, total loss of the will to live. So what's the first step? The first step to overcome the tendency for negative emotions to take over. The first step really is to change your mindset. And that includes the messages we constantly tell ourselves in our minds all the time. So on page 211 and 212 of the book, it's a very useful chart where Rabbi Arush gives examples of the kinds of messages that we often tell ourselves, and then in the other part of the chart, really the kind of messages that we should be telling ourselves. The negative messages typically begin with the word I, me, or my, and such as, for instance, he gives the belief that I'm a loser. I'll never succeed. Nothing ever goes my way. I blew it. All I, right? Whereas the positive, Emunah-based messages we tell ourselves are all about God. Instead of I'm a loser, for instance, he says, success is from God, right? And if I turn to God sincerely, he's going to answer my prayers. He's going to help me succeed. Instead of nothing ever goes my way, right? Everything goes my way. All my setbacks are from God, so I can really realize my nothingness and turn to him for help. Realize I'm really not anything here. I need God for help. Instead of I blew it, even if I missed the train, God's going to send me another train, and whatever happened is exactly what God wanted. I invite you to turn to these pages 211, 212, where he has these lists. Other examples he gives in the book. I invite you to look at these pages again and again. Very helpful when you find yourself telling yourself these kind of negative messages negative messages that are really devoid of Emunah. So then he does an interesting thing in the book. Rabbi Arush interjects a Cherokee legend about a tribal leader who told his grandson about a fight between two wolves going on inside of him. One wolf is full of mistrust, is full of anger, lies, terrible things. The other wolf is full of joy, peace, faith, humility, and kindness. And they're fighting with each other. And so the grandson that he tells the story to asks, which wolf is going to win the fight? Grandfather answers, the one that you feed. Okay? So what does that mean? It says that the messages you tell yourself each and every day have really a very profound impact on your mindset and your ability to come close to God and succeed in life. So, you can feed the me, I, negative wolf, or you can feed the Emunah wolf. The choice is up to you, obviously. Rabbi Arush, in the next part of the book, starts to discuss in this chapter more about the concept of sadness. And I just want to interject here that I don't think he's talking about grief, okay? As in when one of our close relatives dies, God forbid. That's not the same as sadness, I don't think. And I think Rabbi Arush would agree that it's certainly appropriate to grieve for the loss of loved ones. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about something else, I think. And he quotes Rabbi Nachman, who he quotes often in the book, because he says, really at its core, sadness is a statement of complaint against God for not giving you what you want. A person with Emunah doesn't have this issue because he or she recognizes that everything God does is for the person's ultimate benefit. So now, if you see the background behind me is a little different. Before it was getting a little too windy, a little too cold, and a little too busy where we were before. We're now about 3 hours north of where we were before in Israel. This is a place called Zichron Yaakov. It's a beautiful community in the northern part of Israel, south of Haifa and north of Tel Aviv. Let me show you around a little bit. You just see some of the Israeli flags, some of the fruit trees here, and it's just absolutely gorgeous here, and it's a lovely day also. Anyway, so we were on the subject. After Rabbi Arush listed one of the prime causes of sadness and depression as the lack of Emunah, he then gives another cause of it, which I'm very guilty of all the time, which is self-persecution, constantly blaming oneself for one's failures. He says most people are sad and depressed because they feel they're failures and they therefore lack hope. And this self-persecution really results from a lack of Emunah. And a person with Emunah says that God can help me right now, and even if he doesn't, it's for the best. What we see is that Emunah and sadness are mutually exclusive concepts. So to break this cycle, you have to stop persecuting yourself, and you have to talk to God in personal prayer with Emunah. So self-persecution starts really when someone says that they're not going to succeed. It's really the wrong way to think, says Rabbi Arush. The right way to think is, look, God doesn't want me to succeed right now, but this is for the best because he wants me to learn something and to strengthen something within myself. The key is, he says, to focus on God rather than oneself in order to break this cycle of self-persecution. So now that we dealt with the issue of sadness and with self-persecution, Rabbi Arush moves on to another human emotion, which is anger. And of course, as with everything in the Universal Garden of Emunah, Rabbi Arush tells us that really the key to controlling anger, of course, is Emunah, right? Anger management and things like that you hear about, many of these therapeutic messages, okay, they help some, but they're only partial solutions. Without Emunah and an understanding that everything and everyone that God sends to me is for my benefit, no matter how annoying they may seem, we're subject to fits of rage and anger in response to all challenges from all situations and from people. This is my take a little bit. How much, those of you who may go on social media, how much of social media is filled with these videos with these so-called Karens, right? Who seemingly go out of their way to become enraged about situations many of us would find extremely trivial. Many folks find videos of these folks amusing because really, I think it's a part of each and every one of us that recognizes that everything comes from God. And if you're not getting what you want right now, okay, so it's God's will. And no amount of screaming, yelling, and cursing is going to change that. And Rabbi Arush says, quoting King Solomon, anger rests in the bosom of fools. So when we see a quote-unquote Karen or anyone else who's just lost all control and demonstrates angry, insane behavior, particularly over something that's really not that big of a deal, like the lady, I think there's one video of a lady who flies into a rage because a local boat dock won't rent her a yacht. And, they're not renting yachts and everybody there owns yachts, but she's not willing to accept that. So she goes absolutely crazy. And then there was a few years ago, there was some other guy walking his dog in Central Park or something. Some lady went nuts over that because she didn't think he was supposed to be there. And so she went into a rage and called the police. And this is very amusing to us, but really there's nothing funny about it because, as Rabbi Arush points out, anger is like a spiritual acid which corrodes your soul. Angry people, really what happens to them is they lose all connection with God. So to regain that connection, you have to uproot the anger and learn to develop Emunah like it's a second nature, almost like an autonomic response, like breathing or seeing. Yes, there's some things that come our way that are difficult. And I love Rabbi Arush's turn of words here. He says, life is no picnic, but a picnic cannot correct a soul. I think that's a beautiful way he puts it. In other words, your mission on earth is not to live 24/7, toes in the sand at a beach in the Caribbean, as many of us have been taught. That's the ultimate. Your mission really in this world is to truly correct your soul and be the awesome person that you were meant to be, okay? And are meant to become. And those corrections, those soul corrections can and do come with very difficult challenges sometimes, but it's all worth it in the end. And this is how the world really becomes a better place. I think that's part of the point of his book. This whole book is that by each and every one of us becoming the best people that we can be, that we're sent here to be. And he gives an example, one of my all-time heroes, Helen Keller. Many younger folks, maybe who are watching this video, don't even know who she is and were never taught who she is. I strongly suggest you Google her and you learn about what she overcame, okay? Helen Keller contracted an illness at a very young age that left her both blind and deaf. And despite that challenge, through perseverance and determination, she slowly began to perceive the world through touch and ended up becoming a tremendous advocate for the blind and promotion of Braille, as well as a beacon for peace, and a tremendous advocate for charitable causes, a prolific author, a lecturer, and a true leader and pioneer for the rights of the disabled, and as well as women all over the world. Imagine if she would have led her life wallowing in self-pity and anger and bitterness and jealousy. She never would have accomplished the amazing things that she accomplished. The point is, we're each given the tools that we need to accomplish our specific mission in life, even if sometimes the tools may seem that they're lacking. When one pursues one's true purpose in life, there's no room for jealousy of other people or that have traits or apparent advantages from yours. Why be jealous of NBA players if you're not 6'8"? Okay, that's not your mission on this planet. Yeah. So Rabbi Arush next mentions one of the hardest challenges, and that is poverty. Why does God make someone poor? He says that oftentimes a person who's poor needs a soul correction that necessitates humility, Emunah, and prayer. And poverty can cultivate and motivate the desire to engage in prayer. If the same person were wealthy, they probably would never pray to God, and they put all their trust in their wealth instead of God. It's not an easy path, not an easy test by any means. And it takes a tremendous amount of Emunah not to look at successful people and be jealous of them. Rabbi Arush's point here is not for us to question why God chose this particular soul correction to the poor person's soul. If they succeed in making the correction and learn to strengthen themselves and live a life of true Emunah, then such a person realizes that his or her current situation really is for the ultimate good. Rabbi Arush says that actually the test of wealth is far more difficult. It's very easy to fall into the trap of wealth and believe that your own power and cunning made you rich, when in fact a wealthy person has always got to realize that God is the one that gave you all the wealth and money and power. And the wealth that you receive is not there to, feed your bodily appetites and hoard the money you're given. It's there so a person, can perform acts of charity, generosity, and humility. The bottom line, Rabbi Arush says on page 225 of the book, is that one should never be jealous of someone else's success. Material success is up to God, so why be envious of another person? So over on page 227, Rabbi Arush gives a famous story of Rabbi Nachman, who he quotes many times in this book, the clever and the simple. Okay? And he says there that they were two friends. One really smart, the other simple. It's a very famous story. And the simple person learned shoemaking. Okay? And while he could earn a very basic living, he was only, let's say, he's mediocre in shoemaking because he kept things very simple. He didn't have any time for anything because he worked very hard, and it took him maybe longer than somebody that was very, very proficient in making shoes to accomplish what he accomplished. And that being said, he was in the habit of always being happy. This is the simple shoemaker. And what he would do is he would come home and he would pretend that he had all kinds of food. He would say to his wife, he would eat bread and he'd have water. And he would say to his wife, give me some beans and sauce, my wife. And she would cut him a slice of bread and he'd eat the slice of bread. Oh, what delicious beans and sauce. He would say, oh, that sauce was amazing. How about some meat? She'd come another little slice of bread. And he'd eat the piece of bread and he'd say, oh, that was the greatest meat ever. What delicious meat. And his wife to give him beer or wine. Of course, there was only water. And he'd drink the water and he'd say, oh, that's amazing beer. It's incredible. And he would praising it, as if it's actually really fine beer or fine wine. And he acted like this with all his meager possessions. And he was very happy and he was very content all the time. And now he charged less for his shoe work than maybe other shoemakers, and he didn't worry about it. He knew how much profit he needed to make. He made that profit with the materials costs, and that was enough for him, and he was always happy. Now, Arush points out, don't think that this simple shoemaker was stupid. Okay, he was not stupid. He just knew his place in the world. He knew the talents that God gave him, and he wasn't jealous of anybody else. He knew his task was to do the very best that he could, and with whatever he had, and be happy about it. So he worked hard. He never gave up. Now, as we said, the simple shoemaker had a clever friend who was precisely the opposite of this guy. The clever friend was constantly filled with agony. He was a very intelligent man, a craftsman and a doctor with a tremendous reputation. And Rabbi Nachman gives an example of how this man suffered so much. He said he knew he did the best he possibly could. He did a perfect job in his work, as a craftsman and a doctor. If somebody criticized him for it, he fell apart. He couldn't deal with it. Or if he made a mistake and he was praised and appreciated, if he knew he made a mistake and only he knew it, the fact that he made some tiny mistake drove him crazy and he couldn't deal with it. It made him miserable. Sometimes his simple friend, who was always happy, would hang out with this rich and clever friend that he grew up with, and that is totally miserable. And he'd see that he was miserable, and he'd ask him, look, hey, somebody as smart and as wealthy as you, why are you always suffering all the time? I'm always happy. Why are you always suffering? Where's all your cleverness gotten you? People that make fun of me don't realize how happy I am. And it's really they're that on a lower level than me, because I'm happy and they're not for no reason. Maybe it'd be better if you were simple like me, then you'd be happy. But then the clever guy shot back at him, look, hey, I could never be at your level, buddy, because you're already clearly nuts. You're crazy, you're insane. And you could never be as wise as me. You think you can be as smart as me? That's impossible. So then the simple guy says basically, excuse me, with God, anything is possible because he knows this. And even being as wise as you. And this made the clever friend laugh his head off and thought it was a very silly thing to say. And at the end of the whole tale, there's a whole series of events occur where the simple guy ends up becoming the regional governor and a close advisor to the king because he was so honest and so humble, whereas the mocking, supposedly clever friend ends up essentially, as I recall, in hell, and his friend has to come get him out, and his friend, the clever friend still doesn't even believe he's in hell. He's sitting there in hell. Point is that this guy who lives a simple life and understands his place in the world, not that he doesn't try hard, he tries the best he can, but he understands, and he's honest, and he knows his place, he's happy all the time. He ends up being the most successful person ever, and the other guy is, no matter how successful he is, he's completely miserable. That's not a good way to live. We're going to go on to another trait that Rabbi Arush addresses, and that's the emotion and trait of stinginess. Most folks I know would call that being cheap. I don't think Rabbi Arush is talking about somebody who's being frugal, with their money, like not wasting your money. He's talking about someone whose wealth blinds them to the needs of other people, and they refuse to give. Okay? Now, you're not obligated to spend more than you can afford, except in one area. And ladies, you're going to love this. My wife is watching me over there. You got to spend lavishly on your wife. Okay? There's nothing that makes a wife more miserable, Arush says, than a stingy or cheap husband. Our sages actually say one should sacrifice as to what he himself needs, spend far less than you can afford on your own clothes and needs. When it comes to your wife, you should spend more than you can afford. Okay? And if one cannot afford what his wife wants, he should pray that God give him the means to afford it. How about that? So the bottom line, Rabbi Arush says, is without Emunah, a person suffers greatly every time he spends money. But God doesn't send us money so we can hoard it in the bank and while our wives and children and other people that we should give charity to suffer. That's not what it's there for. It's clear Rabbi Arush is not saying we should spend money like a drunken sailor, though, on things we don't need or inappropriate things. But what we want to spend it on is things that we need for family needs, such as the education of our children or the dressing of our family appropriately, and appropriate clothing for holidays or family celebrations. When these expenditures come up, you shouldn't complain. He also says that charitable giving, which we all know, and I'm sure many of you heard, is supposed to be 10% of your income. This is not part of the ledger. Okay? In other words, our tradition is that when you're allotted a certain sum of money each year by God, the money for charity doesn't work that way. The more you give, the more you receive. And we're also told that those, we call this tithing, of course, those who tithe become rich. And I've seen this confirmed by many, many people, not just from this book, but from many other books. It's true. The bottom line, the money is not yours. The money that you receive is not yours. It's entrusted to you to perform God's will while you're here. And then he relates a lovely story over on page 236 about this poor father who needed money to marry off his daughter. The wealthy person he was sent to in order to ask for the money for his daughter's wedding blew him off in a very arrogant way. And so this rabbi sent him to another person who was a poor person, actually. So you go to this guy. And he went to this poor person who did everything he could to get him the money for his daughter's wedding. And in fact, he succeeded. He worked very hard to get him the money. This guy didn't have anything himself, but he knew it was a good deed. It was something good to do. And of course, what happens in the story, the poor person who raised the money for the father of the bride became the rich person. And the rich person who arrogantly refused the father, who needed the money, right, for his daughter's wedding, ended up becoming impoverished. Why? Because the wealthy person had proven himself no longer a worthy trustee of the funds that he was given, okay, by God, okay? So these funds were transferred for the poor person who gave up everything to help the impoverished father who needed the money for his daughter's wedding. He had proved himself a worthy trustee of the money. So Rabbi Arush ends the chapter by reminding us that Emunah is a cure for really any negative character trait or emotion. He lists several of them as examples: arrogance, gluttony, flattery, slander. All these traits demonstrate a lack of Emunah, putting one's trust and faith in something other than God. A person with Emunah can truly be free of all these negative traits and live a sweet and fulfilling life. So for episode 9, God willing, we're going to begin chapter 7, where Rabbi Arush gives us the wealth of practical tips on how to build Emunah in your life. Once again, if you live in Virginia, North Carolina, and you'd like a free copy of the Universal Garden of Emunah book, all you got to do is contact us at the number on the screen, and we'd be honored and overjoyed to get it out to you. Meanwhile, from the Holy Land of Israel, this is Joe Miller. Please have a wonderful and blessed day and a healthy, happy New Year. Joe Miller out.